Hey everyone, welcome back to the Armchair Fantasy Football Podcast. We are the Working Class Podcast and also the Blue Collar Ballers. I'm DJ Marcotte and I'm here with my friends Tom Martell and John Sorois. And we're going to talk about today, guys, we're going to talk about top 12 tight ends coming out of the 2020 season. What a year it was. And tight ends, it's one of my favorite positions, Tom, John, you know that. I'm a tight end guy. I like to try to predict the next bust out or burst out tight end or sleeper tight end. Because to me, unlike most of the fantasy pundits out there, John, to me, tight end is a really, really important position. Do you know why I think that?
Because it's undervalued?
Because there's so few good ones. You know what I mean? So if there were three really good quarterbacks and that was it, the quarterback position should be more coveted. Because it's really strange because the thought process that's used for running backs, there's only a few stud running backs, right, Tom?
Yeah, so you get them the first 5 picks.
But they don't use the same thought process for tight ends, which I get it. Tight ends don't score as many points, but when you have a Travis Kelce, who, spoiler alert, is number one, when you have a Travis Kelce, you have that much more an advantage over your opponents that might have a Dalton Schultz, who's at the back end of the top 12. So tight ends, for me, really important. I love tight ends. What about you, John?
I like tight ends. The only problem I had this year was like...
And you cannot lie, right?
Yes, I cannot lie. I had a hard time playing the tight end the right week. I had the right tight ends, just I couldn't play him the right week, and finally when I got it right, it was too late.
The top tight ends, Tom, are so important to me that in our tag team league, when John and I lost George Kittle, we went out and we traded for Darren Waller, and it paid off because we won the championship. Where do you rank tight ends?
I've always been a huge tight end fan. They've always been the quarterback's best friend. If they're in trouble, you always go to the tight end. They're not usually the guy who gets 25, 30 points. You're going to get 10 to 15 consistently from a good tight end. Unless you do have a Kelce or a Kittles.
Absolutely. Very important position. So we'll talk about that. Top 12 tight ends. We will not talk about current events because this is a safe space. Right, guys? This is a safe space for our listeners to come. Not have to worry about all that trash going on in the real world, I guess. And we live in the fantasy world, and I'm happy to live here in the fantasy world. What about you guys?
Oh, I agree. This is
better
so
than
much
the real
easier.
world. So we won't talk about that stuff, but what we will talk about is, like I said, top 12 tight ends. We're going to talk about a little bit of news going on in the Houston Texans camp. John, we'll touch on that real quick, and all kinds of other stuff. So let's get right down to it. Let's talk about Houston and Deshaun Watson, John. What's going on?
Right now there's a lot of speculation / rumor, has not been confirmed, that Deshaun Watson is possibly going to request a trade out of Houston to play elsewhere.
And we touched on this prior to the show here. If I'm Bill Belichick, because let me preface this by saying somebody in the organization was asked in Houston, and I can't remember who it was, frankly, but they said, what would it take to get Deshaun Watson? And they're like, well, we're not really shopping him right now. But, of course, there's the but, 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and a player. So immediately in my mind, you thought a similar thing, John. Immediately in my mind, I'm like, New England, get rid of Gilmore. He's good, right, Tom? But he's not as good as he was.
Big salary, though. That might scare them off.
Might not, though, because they're getting rid of Deshaun's got a big salary, too. So let's say they move Deshaun, they get Gilmore back. That defense is horrible. They can use everything they can get, on defense, and then they get New England gives up 2 firsts and 2 seconds, which Bill Belichick can't make a good pick in the first 2 rounds to save his life anyway, John. So what's the difference? Would you do it? And would you, as a Patriots fan, be happy about it?
Personally, yes, I would definitely be happy about this. Yes, it would stink to lose Gilmore, but there was already trade talks this year. His salary is like almost $15 million a year, and it's not that I don't think Gilmore is a great player, but they hold that much cap space. We can find a player that probably lives up half to those standards and at a cheaper cost, and probably, there's free agency too. There's a lot of good players available, but this way you would not have to worry about a quarterback situation for the next 5 years, if not longer. And that's something that's hindered that team this year is they need to build on a quarterback. We know Cam Newton, like they said, the season's over. They're parting ways, so he's not back. And
that's the thing officially?
I read they're parting ways.
Okay, because I haven't seen that yet. What have you seen, Tom? Anything in
I
there?
read something that said the best bet right now, he's going to be on the Baltimore Ravens next year as a backup.
That would be interesting. This is how I quantify moves like this and trades like this. If I'm a GM of an NFL team, am I going to have a better chance of winning a Super Bowl with Deshaun Watson or Stephon Gilmore and 4 guys that I drafted? To me, I got a better chance with Deshaun Watson. What do you think, Tom?
Oh, I agree. And most of the time, the Patriots will trade that first for a second and a 4. So they're going to get lower tier players anyway. I'd do it if I was the Patriots.
John?
You also got to remember not just the Patriots though too. You have other teams.
Well, I was going to segue to that. Who do you think would be a good fit for Deshaun Watson and teams that are crazy enough to do this? I know you had one in mind right away.
San Francisco 49ers. Jimmy G may not be the answer there. They could move Jimmy G plus a couple picks plus another player. They have the wide receiver depth there to help Houston as well because they may not get Fuller, retain Fuller after free agency here. So they're going to need help at wide receiver. Also, they have cornerback depth in San Fran. So they could move someone like a Sherman there, possibly, or one of their backups. They have a lot of depth on defense there. They could. That's another team that could possibly make a run for it.
What about you, Tom? What team would you like to see?
Washington football team. Daniel Snyder does these type of things. He did it with RJ3 in 2012. He traded 2 firsts and 2 seconds to the Rams to get him. He could do it again. He's got so much depth on the defensive line. They can trade one of those guys, not Chase Young or Ryan Kerrigan.
I'm going to tell you something right now. If it's me, and I don't know what that player might be Chase Young that Houston asked for, but if it's me and I'm Tom Brady this weekend, I would not want to look across the field and see Deshaun Watson. I'm pretty cool with Alex Smith. I would not want to see Deshaun Watson, so he really would, I think, bring that team around and be a true contender. A team that I thought of, because we're talking about who's crazy enough, and I think you're right about Daniel Snyder. I mean, look what he did with Albert Hainsworth, one of your favorite all-time players.
$100 million.
Yeah, $100 million for that guy. So we know he's crazy enough. I also think John Gruden's crazy enough. I could see the Las Vegas Raiders making a play at Deshaun. And when you think about it, I also happen to think that the Raiders are going to make a play for a guy like an Allen Robinson in the offseason. There's some really, really top-notch wide receivers that are going to be available in free agency this year, Allen Robinson being one of them. Imagine if Allen Robinson and Deshaun Watson were paired up on this team, or even Will Fuller and Deshaun Watson paired up on this team, because we're not really talking about the fact that Will Fuller is a free agent as well. If Watson ends up getting traded somewhere, I feel like Will Fuller would be interested in that team immediately because of that. What do you guys think of that?
That's definitely another avenue or outlet that could happen, but there's another one they possibly could too. The whole Matt Ryan, Julio Jones trade talks are happening again. Matt Ryan, Julio Jones to Houston in their first round for Deshaun Watson. It could be a good deal for Houston. They're getting the veteran receiver, a veteran quarterback. They're getting a first round pick. Atlanta gets their quarterback of the future.
You mentioned a team, I think it was you, Tom, and it kind of, now that I'm thinking of it and my gears are turning, Tua Tagovailoa is a very raw prospect. He's a raw prodigy in the NFL. I didn't like what I saw this year. You're a little bit more patient on him, Tom, but maybe Tua to Houston in that package would be a good option. And like you said earlier before the show, Miami's got plenty of Houston's picks.
Well, they have that top 5 pick, which I don't know if they want to give up.
They might not want to part with that, but to get Deshaun Watson, again, I'm a GM. Let's say I'm a GM. I'm looking at that top 5 pick. Is it going to be Deshaun Watson? Probably not. Is it going to be that caliber of a player? Probably not. So that's a team, too, that would be interesting. Man, Deshaun Watson, with that team on the rise, their head coach, whose name is escaping me right now, has really done a nice job there.
Brian Flores.
Brian Flores. He might be the actual first coach to be a Belichick prodigy that has really been successful in the NFL. So that's how good of a job he's doing. The bar is not high, on that, but put a guy like Deshaun Watson on that team, and they could, Buffalo better turn, and look over their shoulder, because that could be a team, Tom, that would dominate for a long time.
I thought Deshaun Watson was the best quarterback coming out in 2017. Mahomes changed that 180, but he's very talented. He came from Clemson, won the national championship.
But to be, honestly, a second, and not a distant second, to a transcendent talent that really changed the game, there's really no shame in that, I don't think.
No.
A lot of stuff that could happen here with Deshaun Watson.
Or it's just smoke and mirrors. They don't do
or it's
anything.
smoke and mirrors and nothing happens, but at least it gives us something to talk about. You know what I mean? Right after the NFL season finishes up, There's always we want this stuff. We want to dig our sink our teeth into this.
I love the trade talks, the trade speculation, the possible free agent signings. This is when free agent signings are opening. It's like Christmas because you're like, who's going where, and it changes the whole dynamics of fantasy football.
We'll wait for that because that's going to be a whole episode in and of itself. But let's move on, guys. We'll talk about top 12 tight ends. Some guys surprised us, some guys didn't. There's some interesting caveats here as well, given the fact that George Kittle would typically be in this top 12 list, right, guys? But not so, given the injury to him, and he missed most of the season. But some very interesting names here. Some guys that we predicted that would rise, and a couple of guys that we didn't, that rose almost to the top at the tight end position. So let's start with you guys want to start number 1, or you want to go backwards?
I say we go backwards and surprise everybody with the top picks.
All right, so with that being said, number 12 on the list is Hunter Henry, Los Angeles Chargers. I like Henry. I was a little disappointed that he took a step back this year, guys, especially considering this team franchise tagged him. So they sent a lot of money his way. With that being said, started the season with Tyrod Taylor, then Justin Herbert got in there, and competing with targets, with Austin Eckler and Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, of course, some really talented guys. So he kind of took a back seat here.
Yeah, Phillip Rivers left, and that was his bread and butter. He loved the tight ends. He loved the running backs. Herbert went down the field more, so it did affect him a little bit.
And he did have 9 games, John, that with double-digit PPR points, so 9 out of his 16 or 15 or 16 games. So that was encouraging to see, but not quite what we expected, I don't think, this year from Hunter Henry. We expected, I would say, a top 5 finish, especially if you told me that George Kittle was going to miss time this year. I would have expected him to be right in that top.
Yeah, it's not so much like the receptions or the targets. I think those were still there. I mean, missing a few games, he probably would have finished at least in the top 10, but the disappointing part is seeing the low touchdowns, only 4 touchdowns all year. But like Tom said, they utilized the deep ball more. But what actually hurt, I think, Henry, is when Eckler came back, because I feel like he wasn't phased out, but he wasn't a primary target anymore. It became more the Eckler show and Keenan Allen.
He was 6th among tight ends and targets, but he didn't hit that 100 target mark. And the other thing that hurt Hunter Henry a lot, guys, was his yards per reception. He took a huge dip there. It was actually a career low for him in terms of yards per reception. It was at 10.2. His career average is 12.1. 2016 he had 13.3. 2019 12.9. That was 2017, sorry. And then 2019 11.9. Let's not forget he missed 2018. And then of course this year dropped all the way down to 10.2. So Tom, it's been a precipitous drop for him. Is that something to be concerned about, number 1? And number 2, being a free agent again this year, do you expect Hunter Henry to stay on the scene here in LA?
I think he's gone. I think he's going to go to New England Patriots. They like the tight ends like him, and they can probably use him next year.
Well, hopefully they learned a lesson too in terms of what they put out there for tight end this year. I mean, they could assemble an all-star team if they wanted to this year, but I suppose any team could do that. What about the decline in his efficiency?
I think the injury from 2 years ago did affect him a little bit. And new quarterback, it's almost a new system when you get a totally different quarterback out there. It affects the tight ends because he doesn't go down the field as much. He was more of a safe, just throw it out of the backfield to him type.
Good news is he did average double-digit PPR points, John, 10.4, and that's the second highest of his career coming off 2019 where he was averaging 12.5. So not a total wash here. What's your outlook for Henry moving forward, and do you think he ends up in LA?
I think they're going to move on from him, to be honest. I think with Eckler back, they have, obviously he's a target, but they have somebody like a Steven Anderson, like you talked about. I'm trying to think of the other tight end this week that did well as well. So they don't desperately need him. I think that he's going to be signed somewhere else. I don't think they're going to franchise him again. I think they'd rather retain a Keenan Allen, a Mike Williams, and probably just build off a younger tight end here.
All right, next on the list, number 11 is none other than Dalton Schultz. Bit of a surprise this year, too, because we didn't even think Dalton Schultz was going to be the starting tight end for this team.
No, we thought Blake Jarwin.
And he was. Blake Jarwin was. And then, of course, Dallas has the worst strength and conditioning team in the NFL, in my opinion, because they just have players go down left and right. It's like the Infinity War over there. So Blake Jarwin did get hurt. Dalton Schultz stepped into that role, and I think we need to consider that I mean, let me just say, Jarwin was hurt very early on in the process. But Tom, I think we need to consider his finish, given that he wasn't the starting tight end this year.
He played well down the stretch. He got great chemistry with Dalton for a while there, and you could see he was not going to get you the 30 points. He was a 10-point guy, which he almost averaged for the whole year, but 9.2.
Yep, absolutely. His yards per reception, though, John, were not all that impressive. 9.8 is fine for a tight end, and it is a big jump from the year before. He's averaged 8.5 on his career, so not horrible, but still not a game breaker type of guy. And as far as double-digit performances, he did not get a whole lot of them. He had about 5 or 6 double-digit performances in PPR on the season, so definitely a feast or famine guy. A streamer, John.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, next year, this could be either a committee at tight end in Dallas, could be Jarwin and Schultz sharing time, or it could be just Jarwin. So it's something you're going to want to keep an eye on preseason next year and the offseason and all that, OTAs, find out who's the leading dog here, because he could take the job. It's still up for grabs.
Or they could make a play for Hunter Henry, although I don't think
Exactly.
they have the money for that. But Dalton Schultz did finish in the top 11 in targets at the position, and in completions, he had 64 completions, so he was higher than Mark Andrews, Hayden Hurst, Eric Ebron, Noah Fant, Hunter Henry in terms of completions. So pretty good year for him, and he came out of nowhere. He actually only had, I think, 3 or 4 completions less than T.J. Hawkinson, who had a really good year this year. So something to consider there about Dalton Schultz.
And out of the top 12 tight ends, he was the least owned tight end out of the top 12. He was only 22.1% owned in leagues.
Yeah, and he almost hit 90 targets, too. So he was ahead of Gesicki, he was ahead of Gronkowski, Jimmy Graham, Zach Ertz, Austin Hooper, Dallas Goedert, ahead of all those guys in targets. That, I don't think, repeats next year, Tom.
No, most of those guys missed a game or two, so that's a little misleading stat. If you put these guys at 16 games, I think they'll have more targets than him.
Yeah, for sure. All right, next up on the list, Tom, is your boy, Noah Fant. This was a guy that you predicted would have a big year this year. Also a guy that dealt with some injuries. He did play a fair amount of games, Tom, but he came out of a lot of those early.
First quarter, if the game he's out, he's questionable to come back. He come back in the fourth quarter, he get 8 points.
He did finish strong, though. In Week 13, 9.7 points. He did miss Week 14. In Week 15, 20.8. In Week 16, 12.5. And in Week 17, 8.8. And his target count in those games was 7, 11, 9, and 6. So he really started to seemingly click, John, with Drew Lock down the stretch. Superb talent. Yards per reception, 10.9. He averages 12.5 for his career. There's a lot to like about Noah Fant. Can he stay healthy, John? I guess is question number 1. Number 2, do you consider that chemistry something that will continue on into 2021? Also, his first 2 games, 19.1 points and 17.7. So he started strong, he finished strong.
I think the only thing I was down about Fant was just his touchdown total, same as last year as a rookie. But you remember, he's still young. This year was only his second year. I mean, the concern is durability, but you can't play that. That's the Keenan Allen rule here. You can't take that into effect. I think Fant's going to be fine. Fant is still one of Locke's favorite targets, but I think a game changer this year was them losing Cortland Sutton, and it put a lot of pressure because people are like, hey, Fant was the second receiver last year, second best target on the team. It was Sutton and Fant. Well, Sutton went down. People knew that Fant was going to get the ball quite a bit, so they covered him more. And then the injuries didn't help, but I think next year he's going to be fine. I think he actually increases his numbers.
62 receptions, Tom, for a guy that missed that much time off and on is pretty darn good, especially at the tight end position. Tim Patrick was a big factor here. Jerry Jeudy wasn't really a big factor. So if Tim Patrick continues to be productive and Jerry Jeudy, enhances his ability, does that hurt Fant next year?
I don't think so. I think it actually helps him. It gets the coverage off him if Judy plays well. If Cortland Sutton comes back the way he was 2 years ago, then this offense changes. Just Drew Lock has to be better than under 60% completion percentage for the season, which didn't help.
Yeah.
So a lot of those targets were high. They tipped away from him. A few interceptions thrown his way.
Yeah, and another number that stood out to me with Fant, guys, is his completion percentage in the red zone was super duper low, 53.85%. When you're looking at a guy like the apex, Darren Waller, 77.8, Travis Kelce, And then, a guy like Mark Andrews, 65. So we really want to see that number rise. I also wanted to mention this number about Dalton Schultz. His completion percentage in the red zone, 71.43. So only behind Darren Waller in that category.
Wow.
So it's just another interesting stat there. Noah Fant, where do you think he lands next year on this list, John?
Probably top 5.
Really?
Yeah.
Tom?
If he's healthy and Drew Lock can do what Josh Allen did last year from year 2 to year 3, completely change his game, better completion percentage. That's what it was. It was just a lot of errant throws his way.
And let's not forget the COVID game, too. The
That
wide
was a
receiver.
wash. It was a complete wash.
So that doesn't help his stats either, I'm saying.
Yeah, no, in top 5, I seem a little surprised by that. I don't think it's all that ambitious, but with the return of Kittle, the rise of some of the other guys we're going to talk about on this list, I don't think it's a guaranteed sure thing. It's not a stone cold lead pipe lock.
No, I'm not saying it's a lock. He'll be close, though, I think.
Gronk smashed all the way to the number 10 spot here, top 10 tight end for Gronkowski. I expected more. I said in the offseason, guys, he could have been top 5. Tom, do you think that would have been the case if he had his sea legs from week 1?
If he would have played the year before, I think it would have been a different story. But he took the whole year off to go play wrestling for a little while, and you could see it for the first month of the season. He was just on it himself.
John, what did you think of this year for Gronk?
I think Gronk had a very productive year coming out of retirement. And let's not forget all the weapons that are there. I think Gronk did perfectly fine. He still is one of Brady's favorite targets. And I think Arians was right when he said at the beginning of the season about Gronk that it would take him a little bit to get used to the weather down there and to get used to the conditioning. But once he got used to it, look, he started performing.
He was 3rd among tight ends in targets in the red zone. One of the reasons I love Gronkowski. Only behind Darren Waller, Travis Kelce, Jimmy Graham were also tied for 2nd. And then Gronkowski was right under them with 21 red zone targets at the tight end position. That's awesome. That's what I love about Gronk. What else I love about Gronk is the fact that he doesn't need to be targeted in the end zone or the red zone to get touchdowns. He's still shown that explosive ability, guys. I saw it as recently as a couple weeks ago. He just gets that crossing route, Tom, that we've seen a million times, and he can still execute.
The 25-yard touchdown, the 35-yard touchdown.
So that, to me, I think, again, Gronk seems to have his sea legs. He looked great down the stretch. He's not going to be as consistent even next year, I don't think, just because there's the ABs. Although Chris Godwin's a free agent, is he not, John?
I believe he is.
So that could be interesting. But the Mike Evans, there's just so many guys to throw to there. And if they upgrade the position at running back to a better pass-catching back than Ronald Jones, then there's going to be even less there. But Gronkowski is definitely, I think a top 5 value tight end just because of what he can give you in the box score. But he's feast or famine. He's boom or bust.
Yeah. The good thing is he played all 16 games this year, which
that was another remarkable
thing.
thing. Yeah, and I thought that was a possibility in the offseason given the fact that he finally rested his body. He didn't play every game every year, but that's because he never really had a chance to truly heal up. And although, yes, he did jump off a balcony for Vince McMahon there, I think he probably didn't hurt himself too bad there. I think they protected him to the right degree there, and he just really just healed up, while he was away, and we saw Gronk back. It wasn't every game, it wasn't every play, but it was good enough to want him on my team in fantasy. We had him also, John, in the tag team league.
Yeah, he was great, and he was actually led all these out of these top 12 tight ends. He actually led them all with yards per reception with 13.8.
Yep, beautiful. Good to see, right, guys?
Great.
I think we're all happy to see it.
He's a fun player to watch out there. He's just a good kid out there on the field.
Another good kid, a guy that reminds me a lot in terms of ability, not necessarily size, but ability and undeniable ability and athleticism, similar to Gronk, is Mike Gesicki. And he came in at number 9 here. And Gesicki, you guys know, is a guy that I touted big time coming into the season. I loved his measurables. I loved his yak ability, his yards per catch, his contested catch. Mike Gesicki has every quality, John, in a really supernova level tight end. We didn't quite see it this year, but it crested, didn't it?
Yeah, no, it went up and down with the change of Fitzpatrick. The only thing I wonder is I feel like Gesicki did a lot better with Preston Williams not on the field. So if Preston Williams comes back, is it going
With him not on the field?
Yes, he did better with him not on the field. His presence.
Well, Preston Williams lasted, 1-2 games like he always does?
He got hurt. So the question is going to be is that going to change his dynamics? I don't think it does. I think Gesicki will be more the number 2 target here.
Yeah, I disagree with that, Tom. I don't think Preston Williams had much to do with it. I think it was building chemistry with Tua that was the problem.
Oh yeah, everything was short. It's the way the left-handed throw. It's easier to throw as a tight end. It is downfield to the wide receivers, just the way the ball leaves the hands.
Well, I got good news for you on the short thing. 13.3 yards per reception for this guy. He still is showing that blow-up ability, that dynamic ability. And in the last 5 games, 11.5, 23.8, 23.5, 9.4, and 9.7. So pretty much 10 or more points in PPR in the last 5 games in an offense that didn't always look good, right, Tom?
Yeah, they struggled hard with Tua out there. It was just a game script, game managing the offense. But with Gesicki, he took more chances than he did with wide receivers.
Absolutely. And the one thing that was concerned for me is his targets were not as high as I would like them to be. He finished 12th among tight ends in targets, John. But if those target numbers can go up at that 13-plus yards per reception, watch out.
Yeah.
Watch out. And he did get 6 touchdowns, too, which is right near the top of the tight end position.
Yeah, if he keeps his targets like he was the last 4 games where he had that chemistry with Tua, you're talking possibly, let's say even at 8 target average, you're talking almost 130 targets at tight end.
Yep. He had more touchdowns than Eric Ebron, Tyler Higbee, who finished strong in 2019 at the end there. He had more touchdowns than Hunter Henry, Austin Hooper. I mean, these are names, at the tight end position. And honestly, Tom, the other thing I want to touch on here with Gesicki is tight ends don't peak this early, do they?
It was year 3, and you're stellar. It's usually year 1, year 2, but it does time to develop on the field. You have more learning pros you do in college and more blocking.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just catching the ball at the pro level. Anything else you guys want to touch on with Mike Gesicki? You like his outlook for 2021?
I do.
I do too, especially if Tua develops better as a quarterback.
No doubt about that. A guy that slipped a little bit this year was next on our list, number 8, right? Number 8, number 6. Where am I at
6.
here? We're already up to 6. Damn.
Yes.
Don't be afraid to correct me, by the way. Mark Andrews is apparently number 6 on the list. We're blazing through this list here. He didn't blaze through the fantasy season this year, though. He went from 207.2 points in 2019 to 170.1 this year. A huge drop, Tom. And he pretty much was out there every game.
He missed the 2 games for the COVID because he has health issues besides.
Right.
And early in the year, Lamar Jackson was not throwing the ball at all. It was like he wasn't even on the field, but he was.
For all intents and purposes, he had a full season, and he started strong. We saw, what we're used to seeing out of Mark Andrews, John. In week 1, 6 catches, 58 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then he blipped back up on the radar again in week 5 and 6 with 20.7 points and 17.6. But we didn't see Mark Andrews, the one we know, again until week 10. Good news is, from then on, he was double digits down the stretch. So the middle of the season was rough for Mark Andrews. My opinion, interesting to see what you think, John. My opinion is they didn't let Lamar in this offense run the way it ran last year. And when they started doing that, we started seeing the production again from Mark Andrews. I think next year's a huge bounce back year for Mark Andrews.
Well, I mean, I know he performed the first couple weeks, but we do forget that they had a tough schedule other than Houston at the beginning. They played a Washington, which was really good on defense. Cleveland's not awful on defense. They're decent. They played Houston. They played Philly. They played Pittsburgh, Indy. So Baltimore was not handed the easiest schedule, but I 100% agree with you that this offense was not the same last year, and they weren't running it the same. They figured out probably around week 10, right when they played New England, that they got to go back to that old way, and that's when Mark Andrews started to pop again. And I know the COVID cost them a couple of games, and the changing a quarterback of COVID, having McSorley instead of a Lamar Jackson out there, it changes it. But I think Mark Andrews will bounce back perfectly fine next year. Nothing to worry about.
I totally agree. And you're looking at a guy, Mark Andrews, that had 20 targets in the red zone, which was 4th highest in the league. On top of that, he was targeted 90 plus times. He only caught 57 though, Tom. So that tells me they weren't quality targets.
Yeah, Lamar can get out there and just look horrible some games, but when he gets in a rhythm, that's when all the balls go perfectly to Andrews.
Yep. And he also had 7 touchdowns, which only Jonnu Smith, Jimmy Graham, Darren Waller, Robert Tunyon, and Travis Kelce had more in the red zone. So anyway, that's Mark Andrews in a nutshell. But we all agree he's going to bounce back next year.
Yes.
All right, guy that I had, and I lost George Kittle in our keeper league, our league of record, and you know, I guess you could say T.J. Hawkinson led me to a champion. Well, he didn't lead me, but he helped me get a championship. 2 of them actually in that league. And it was really fun. Like, I was getting double-digit points every week, Tom, from T.J. Hawkinson. But then Matt Stafford got dinged up starting in week 15, and he went to hell.
Oh yeah, after Galladay went out, Stafford had great chemistry with Hawkinson on the field, and when Stafford got hurt, the backups just didn't utilize him at all. It was Marvin Jones.
But still, John, only his second season, T.J. Hawkinson. Finishing
I
this
think
high.
for his second season, I think he still shined. I mean,
For a while, he was the number 3 tight end until that
yeah,
last
no,
3
but
weeks.
you're absolutely right. He starts off week 1, week 2, double digits. Week 3, he just misses double digits. Same with week 6, misses double digits. His worst game from week 1 to 10 was week 10 with 3.3 fantasy points. After that, he went double digits again, you know, like 10 to 15 points, and then it was week 15 when the Stafford injuries started piling up. Chase Daniel just doesn't like targeting the tight end.
Well, Chase Daniel doesn't like targeting anything that isn't dirt and
Yeah.
and
He likes to
grass.
hold the clipboard for years. That's all he's
He
pretty good
sucks.
at.
He
Yeah.
absolutely
So
sucks.
a concern here would be if Stafford doesn't come back to Detroit, but I think he'll be back.
Is Galladay a concern, Tom? Because you're looking at this guy, T.J. Hawkinson, got 100 plus targets this year. Is he getting 100 targets again if Galladay's out there?
I think if Stafford's healthy, I think both those guys can flourish in this offense. I just think they're going to feed off each other.
Well, go ahead, John.
I think Marvin Jones will become the guy looking on the outside in next year.
Okay. So next year, way too early, but would you rather have Logan Thomas or T.J. Hawkinson on your team?
Depending who quarterback
Yeah,
is.
quarterback
I'll take
situation
Hawkinson.
changes.
Let's just say it's Stafford.
I'm in Washington. They could
Yeah.
change theirs too.
Let's just say it's Alex Smith.
I would rather have Logan Thomas with the amount of targets he saw. He saw a lot more targets.
I like Hawkinson. I think he has a lot more upside.
Well, you mentioned Logan Thomas's targets. He had 110 targets, so we'll move on to him. He is number 4 on our list. And when we sit here and we talk about T.J. Hawkinson, Tom, 101 targets, we're looking at Thomas, who had 110 and didn't even feel like that until the end of the season.
Yeah, he came on strong the last 5 or 6 weeks. You're looking, he was getting 10 receptions, 15 targets. That came out of nowhere.
Some of the numbers here in the games here, John, do help inflate his total target count. He had 16 targets in week 15 and 12 targets in week 16. That's an insane amount, especially week 15. And he turned those targets into 13 catches for 101 yards in week 15. And then also in week 16, that was only 7 catches for 63 yards. This guy reminds me of Darren Waller in a lot of ways because he is very skilled. Doesn't have the skeletons in the closet or the baggage that Darren Waller does. And maybe he isn't as skilled as Darren Waller. And frankly, his yards per reception aren't outrageously high. They're fine. And he's averaged 7.2 on his career. But 2014 kind of threw that off because he played 2 games and he had 0 yards per target and yards per reception. And then also he had a rough year in 2018 for Buffalo, but his target counts were so low, 9 and 17, where it's hard to measure that. His target counts were low in 2019 with Detroit, only 28 targets, and now up to 110 targets. Is this a real late breakout, Tom? Or is this a guy that might have been a one-year wonder? Because we see that at tight end sometimes. Anybody hear about Gary Barnidge?
I was just going to say Gary Barnidge was the same type of player for Cleveland.
Right, so what do you think?
I think it's the same situation, but Alex Smith does like throwing the tight ends, either being Tony Gonzalez, Vernon Davis, Travis Kelce. He's always had the real good ones. This guy's not on that level, but he's performing well with them.
Late breakouts, John, are hard to measure. Gary Barnidge, we'll use him as an example. We thought that could have been the same case you did specifically with Darren Waller. So interesting to see where you are on Logan Thomas. Is he going to be a guy that can do pretty much the impossible, what Darren Waller did, and repeat, have another great season, an even better one than he did in his breakout year?
He had, I believe, 4 different quarterbacks this year. Alex Smith, Kyle Allen, Dwayne Haskins, and Taylor Hinkie, whatever his name is. Heineke. Is there a 5th one? I feel like I'm missing another quarterback.
I don't know, dude.
They've had like
I really don't
wide
pay
receivers throw the
I
ball.
don't really pay
Yeah,
attention
so-
to trash quarterbacks too much.
Well, but that's what I'm saying though.
Yeah.
This guy performed with 4 or 5 different quarterbacks this year. If we have, let's say, Alex Smith back, a steady Eddie guy, who targeted him quite a bit, I think he can actually add to his numbers here. I don't think he's going to be a one-year wonder unless they go different in the draft and go either tight end or wide receiver to complement McLaurin.
Yeah, and looking at Logan Thomas, he broke out in his 5th year. Waller broke out in his 4th, so he's even a later breakout than Darren Waller was. But I like what I see out of him. I'm not willing to bank on him as a top 5 tight end next year, but I do like what I see out of him. And when he can give you the output, like the 20.3, the 16.6, games like that on a consistent basis, that's awesome. He just wasn't very consistent this year, even though he did have a really nice season overall. But I'm not willing to hang my hat on him quite yet. The guy I might be willing to hang my hat on, and he's not. And I'll let you do the honors here because he's not. He's not a late breakout. This was his 3rd season, so that's right around 3rd, 4th season when you expect tight ends to break out. But that was. Are you ready to get him with it?
I want to come as a surprise.
Okay. Well, that was the Tunyon death grip. Robert Tunyon. He had a nice season this year, and he did it in Green Bay, where it doesn't typically happen, John, for tight ends.
Yeah, I mean, all of us have gone by. I don't want to say it's a myth.
And Tom has taken a beating this year because of him.
Green Bay never used to really use its tight ends, so none of us really thought that this guy would amount to anything. And he's.
I mean, Jermichael Finley, right, guys?
And
That's
he
pretty
got
much
hurt.
it.
It was like one or 2 years.
Jimmy
right.
Graham barely saw anything there. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the thing. It was, and even then, it was
Jimmy Graham was a complete flop in Green Bay.
Yeah, that's the thing. We never saw these type of. We haven't seen these type of numbers since Finley, like you
Yeah.
said, and even Richard Rodgers when he was there. And then here comes Robert Tunyon, and he gets double-digit touchdowns, 11 touchdowns in the season. And what's mind-blowing is 59 targets, but 52 receptions. So he pretty much caught everything.
Yeah, 10 games of double-digit PPR performances, and that's just so important when it comes to the tight end position. That's consistency that's really hard to find for tight ends. And he even had one game of over 30 points, and that's really hard to find unless you're talking about that absolute top tier. I want to talk about that top tier when we get to them because there's an interesting stat when I look at most common players on fantasy championship teams that is really telling in terms of should you go after elite tight ends, and we'll get to that. Robert Tunyon is not on that list, however, though he did have a great season. I think he's a TJ Hawkinson type of guy that he might not want to won you a championship, Tom, but he didn't hurt you either.
Oh yeah, you got him basically for free at the beginning of the season. He was not rostered probably almost 99% of the teams during the draft time, so you got him for next to nothing. So it was a nice pickup.
Absolutely. And then when you look at his red zone targets, because to me that's really kind of, I don't want to say the most important aspect for a tight end, but I guess it kind of is because you need a tight end that's going to be targeted heavily in the end zone because they're so touchdown dependent. And Robert Tunyon finished second there in target completion percentage in the end zone, and he finished at 86.67 completion percent in the end zone. Sorry, I'm stuttering all over myself. But among qualifying tight ends with a certain amount of targets, he was actually number 1. So I read that wrong. 86.67% and 11 touchdowns.
I think a lot of people weren't bonding quite. I'm not going to lie. I wasn't completely
On
bonding.
only 60 targets, by the way.
Everybody saw that 3 touchdown game performance he had and thought, hey, maybe it's just a 1 week wonder. But then he still popped after that. He ended up with 8 touchdowns after that. So Tunyon had a great season.
Yeah, and when you look at his overall target count, he wasn't that high for targets in general. But the targets he got in the end zone, he made pretty good hay with them. So Robert Tunyon, great year. I think he could follow it up with another good season. I really want to see his targets across the season, way up there. He was below a lot of tight ends, And I think even George Kittle. Yeah, George Kittle had more targets on the season.
Played half the games.
And played half the game. So you really want to see that go up. Another tight ends that had more targets than him: Jonnu Smith, Gerald Everett, Dallas Goedert, Jimmy Graham, Dalton Schultz. So and some of these guys had a significant amount more targets. And then Drew Sample only had 5 less targets. So we really want to see the target count go up for Robert Tonyan. And if it does, then watch out. That's all
Yeah,
I
it's
gotta
going to be
say.
crazy.
All right, moving on to number 2. The big baller, Darren Waller, man. And this is the stat that I wanted to talk about. When you look at most common players on fantasy teams, there's 2 guys in the top 10. And one of them's Travis Kelce. He's number 2 on the list overall of most common players on fantasy playoff teams, not championship teams. James Robinson, number 1 player. Travis Kelce right there at number 2, 61%. And then the other guy on that list in the top 10 is Darren Waller. So when you sit here and say, well, I don't need to draft a top tight end, I can just stream. Not really what the numbers indicate here. Darren Waller and Travis Kelce are far and away the top 1 and 2 tight ends on the list, and they got you to the playoffs if you had them.
If you're looking at their numbers and you're comparing them to the other tight ends on this list, you're looking at 2 wide receiver numbers. This is insane, their numbers compared to all these other tight ends. Both of them had 100 receptions. Both of them had 140-something targets. They both double digits for yards after reception. And Waller just missed by 1 touchdown for double-digit touchdowns. But these are like having wide receiver ones.
Yeah.
But they're your tight ends. So I can see why getting that elite tight end early in the draft is so important.
Yeah, and of course we'll tie in number 1 to this obviously was Travis Kelce. But real quick on Darren Waller, just to break it down his stats, 11.2 yards per reception, 3rd highest in his career, followed up on that. Breakout year of 2019, but in 2018, guys, again, his sample size was very small, but he had 12.5 yards per reception, and in 2019, 12.7 and 11.2 this year. So a lot, above 11 every game, and he kind of showed signs of that breakout in 2018, Tom.
I believe Jared Cook was still on the team, if I
He was,
remember.
yep.
So he was sharing time with Cook. Once Cook went to New Orleans, he just blew up.
Absolutely. And, the last 3 games in the fantasy playoffs, well, we'll take out week 17, but if you had a championship week that week, you got 22.2, week 16, 13.7, week 15, 25.5, week 11, week 14, 11, and in week 13, it was even better because if you needed him to get you into the playoffs, to get you 38.5 in that huge game that he had. So Waller was awesome, but not as awesome as Travis Kelce. Homeboy might have finished with the most yards in the league if he had played
The last game.
the last week.
They
Tom.
rested him up week 17.
Even Tony Gonzalez has never done that. That's incredible.
No, it was a different situation with the tight ends, but Kelce is
It is what it is, though. You got to give the guy credit. I know you're a Tony Gonzalez honk, and you have every reason to be because he probably is the best tight end, at least pass catching, of all time. But when Kelsey's doing stuff that's rivaling him and breaking his own records in Kansas City, that's incredible stuff right there, and that's hard to do, John.
Yeah, Kelce, like I said, these top 2 tight ends are just, they're not.
I'm just excited looking at this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games with 20 or more points for Travis Kelce.
He averaged 20.9 for the season.
That's insane.
That's wide receiver 1 numbers.
That is insane. It literally is wide receiver 1 numbers, and he's out there competing for targets with Tyreek Hill. Just unbelievable stuff. And looking at his age, he's 31, so he's a little bit older, but tight ends sometimes go longer than they definitely do than running backs, and even sometimes you see them stick around longer than wide receivers, even though they take more of a beating, but I think they're built a little bit better for it.
But it's different because like Gronk took more lower shots than Kelce. You know what I'm saying? You saw the shots that Gronk used to take early in his career, a lot of knee shots, and I'm not saying Kelce doesn't take those kind of shots, but nothing like Gronk did.
Kelsey's just
yeah.
I mean, he's 6'5", 260. Good luck taking that frame down.
Yeah, he's a big guy,
and he's a super athlete, and he's fun. He's like Gronk. He's fun to watch.
He's actually run the ball before too, so the guy can do everything.
Yeah.
He can throw, he can catch.
If Kittle, we're going to talk about George Kittle here. If Kittle can play 16 games next season, I firmly believe, and I said it going into this season, I was right about Devontae too, he would be the number 1 tight end overall. He's going to have to get 16 games, though, to take Kelsey off the throne, right?
Yes, and that, and the other part of it, he needs a consistent quarterback, which they're still searching for.
This is Kelsey's 8th season. He's been doing this a long time, guys. His breakout was basically, his second season he saw 87 targets, Tom. Since 2015, he saw 103 targets, and he's never seen less than 117 since 2016. He has been doing this a long time. He's the most bankable tight end, and we have every reason to believe it's going to happen next year, too.
Oh, yeah. Him and Mahomes just have unbelievable chemistry out there. Even with Alex Smith as the quarterback, he had great chemistry.
Absolutely. All right, that's going to do it, guys. Top 12 tight ends. One of my favorite positions. Maybe my favorite position, I guess. And I don't know. What are we moving on to the next episode, John? Is it quarterbacks? I think it's
quarterbacks, I believe, but I will double check just to let our listeners
Probably
know.
my least favorite position in fantasy, but we get to talk about the undeniable Kavorka that is Pat Mahomes. So that's always a good thing for
Top
me.
12 QBs.
QBs is on deck. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Armchair Fantasy Football Podcast. We appreciate you guys in your viewership. Hopefully on YouTube. We had a little glitch. We're working class guys. We're not IT guys. We're not, what do they call the guys in high school, the video class you go to?
AV.
AV. Well, we're not AV guys. Well, you might have been.
Oh. No.
Probably not. So, we struggle with this stuff sometimes, but we are recording to YouTube, so hopefully that'll help. And, of course, you can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean. Am I missing any?
Instagram.
Instagram, yeah. You can't listen to us on Instagram. We do go live every now and again on Instagram, though, so wrong. But we are on Instagram at armchair_fantasy_football, and on Facebook at Armchair Fantasy Football. And, of course, you can reach out to us, the Blue Collar Ballers, at armchairfb@gmail.com. If you like what we do, if you want us to try something new, you have some ideas for the show, we're obviously open to that, and we appreciate you guys hanging around with us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. As always, keep spreading the word. Remember, I've demanded this of our listeners. Spread the word in 2021.
Yeah, spread the word and get us 100 likes on our...
100? How about 1,000?
We need 1,000 likes.
No.
It's not likes.
Oh,
No.
subscribe.
Let's just let him go. This will be
Just let him go.
entertaining. Let's see what comes out, Tom.
Listeners, Army, listeners, please.
You're really
help us
doing
out.
a great job,
Come
John.
on. We get 100 likes on this video we're going to release.
Yeah.
DJ will do the real Tunyon death grip to Tom. Live.
I'm not doing that, man.
I'll do it.
This is your deal. You've stolen my gimmick. Anyway, definitely spread that word, guys. And until next time, we appreciate you listening and watching on YouTube, hopefully. And we'll see you next time.
See you guys.
See ya.